Hello, I'm David Knapp, Chief Energy Economist at Energy Intelligence Group, and I'm here to ask a couple of questions of Antoine Halff, who is head of the Oil Industry and Markets Division at the IEA. I have a small advantage in asking those questions since I was in that job 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was. And so my first question is, what is the hardest part of the job in today's market? What are the things that you worry about in terms of creating a publication that informs the world, literally, about the situation in supply-demand balances?
I hate to answer a question like this because to say that something is hard, it sounds like I'm complaining about the job. It's actually a fairly easy job. No, it's not coal mining. So that being said, there are some areas where sometimes it's tricky and you can easily not come up with the right answer. And one of the difficulties that we have today is because of the big disparity in the pace of demand growth between supply and demand, between demand in the OECD countries and the emerging market and developing economies, we have a hard time sometimes assessing exactly how comfortable or tight the market is, largely because we don't really measure inventories outside of OECD countries in great detail. So if we look at stocks today, OECD stocks, which is what we really measure, and we try to assess them in terms of days of OECD demand, we find that we have very comfortable stocks, or we are likely to have very comfortable stocks very soon based on our projections of supply and demand. If we look at the same exact stocks and try to measure them in terms of global demand, we have a different picture because demand in non-OECD countries is growing so much faster. But what we're missing is the non-OECD component of stocks, and that can make a big difference, and that's missing in the balances.
Thank you. I think all of us that have to do this for a living in calculating the supply-demand balances have noticed the sort of disconnect between what we see as being large surpluses, what I used to call and you now call the miscellaneous to balance, and the idea that nobody sees any distressed cargoes. It seems like all the oil is finding a home. I have a guess as to where that's going, but I think you also maybe agree with it, and we'd like to hear your view on that.
Well, this is not the first time this happens, as you said. This happened back in the late 90s and at various times in between. But just in the last year, we've seen massive expansion of refining capacity in a number of countries, particularly China and Russia and India, as well as developments in Russia too. So just to support this development of infrastructure, we can guess that quite a large amount of oil was needed to meet minimum operating levels in the tank farms and the pipelines that were associated with those developments. So that's probably one area where we saw a large amount of demand for oil, demand for storage, oil that was removed from the market, sterilized, but that basically sets the stage for a larger increase of available oil once that infrastructure is operating.
Yeah, in fact, that was exactly the answer that I would have given. What do you see going forward? We talked about wildcards in the session, and you had a couple of thoughts on, is there anything else that's occurred to you about what you really have your eye on? I understand a couple of us both talked about the geopolitical background being the thing that you have to watch, but you can't really forecast, nor should you. But are there other things that are sort of in the back of your mind about if it happened, you wouldn't be all that surprised that affect the supply-demand balances?
Well, yeah, just look at the last few years. There were a number of major events that had a large impact on the market and were completely unpredictable. The Fukushima earthquake, the tsunami before that in Thailand, the financial crisis in 2008, not entirely predictable. So the large-scale demand effects, supply effects that can really swing the market one way or another, but that we really can't do anything to predict. The other types of risks are risks that we know are there. We just don't know how they're going to play out exactly. One area, for instance, is regulations. As the oil environment changes, so does the regulatory environment adapt, but we can't predict exactly in what direction those adjustments will be made and what effects they will have on the market.
One last question. The function of the IEA has been and still is to provide a buffer from those kind of events for the developed economies through their stock sharing system, besides the information function that you work so hard to provide and do very well, I might say. There's been some successes in compensating for some losses with Libya and with some other things. Do you think there's a comfort level now with the ability of IEA to organize a release of stocks from the member countries? IEA doesn't control stocks themselves, they just coordinate it. And if you do have that, a comfort level with that, would somebody accuse the IEA of being complacent?
Who would do that? No. Well, yes, I mean, we're sitting on large strategic reserves, and we now have a lot of experience in using those reserves. They're valuable to the market even when we don't use them. But in the last few years, we've had several cases where we did use them, and that made a difference to the market. That being said, it's very difficult to extrapolate from past incidents and predict exactly what will happen in the future. Each incident is different. The context in which all disruptions or events happen is different, and the mindset or the agenda of the member countries might differ as well. So I don't think we should be complacent. I think we should be, take comfort to some degree in the experience that we have acquired in the reserves, the assets that we own and operate. But we also have to be alert to changes in the market and constantly reassess whether our policies, our processes remain adequate and remain the best that we can have given the changes in market conditions.